Are you thinking about buying a home in Cincinnati? Well, before you fall in love with the skyline views or a charming brick home, you need to know what lies beneath the surface, literally. From basement water nightmares to hills that can literally shift beneath your home, we're gonna break down all of the red flags that you need to know about before looking for a home anywhere in the Cincinnati area. And before we jump into the red flags, this is just a quick reminder that this list is coming from years of experience as a realtor in the Cincinnati area. In Ohio and Kentucky, the area has some really unique qualities about it, which is very charming and makes it a place that I love to live. However, there are some things that you're going to want to know before buying a home because it could be a really big issue for you later. So by the end of this video, you're going to have a really good grasp of all of the things that could go wrong in the home that you may be considering to buy. That includes 4 natural threats that are unique to our region, as well as 5 deficiencies that are pretty common in Cincinnati based on our older homes. So let's get started. And I'm actually going to start with the one that most people find most surprising. The Cincinnati area is really prone to landslides. Now, if you were asked to name the most landslide prone areas, you're probably going to think of some West Coast cities. Places like Los Angeles or San Francisco, Portland and Seattle. And you're right about all of those places. They do suffer from those issues. But would you have guessed that those 4 places and Cincinnati make up your top 5 cities on cities that spend the most money to prevent landslides? In fact, as I speak to you today, there are multiple landslides that are active in Cincinnati and have closed down roads. But now that you know to look for it, it's actually pretty easy to spot the issue. One of our most prominent roads, Columbia Parkway, was previously lined with homes, and now there are very few homes there. The only reason why you may have guessed that there were homes there are some staircases that lead to nowhere. Yep, all of these homes were condemned over time based on landslides moving through that area. And as recently as just a handful of years ago, Columbia Parkway had multiple lanes shut down throughout the summer because landslides were so prevalent that it was going on to the highway. I probably don't have to tell you how big of a deal this can be. However, in case that you're thinking, well, this is probably just a smaller landslide, it's not really going to be the issue it is on those West Coast cities that have earthquakes. In fact, a landslide here can make your home a total loss. One of the main reasons why we have so many landslides here is the hilly terrain, but not just that it's hilly, but why it's hilly. Cincinnati is hilly because that is where the glaciers stopped from the last ice age. So those glaciers pushed a lot of soil and sediment, and it's now sitting on a layer of shale. Well, the problem with that is shale breaks down over time, and that top layer of sediment is actually heavier than the lower level. So with that breaking down process, you'll have soil that just slides right down the hill, and it will take your home with it. Our best defense for this issue is our Hillside Overlay District map. This is something that I am checking for any home that my clients are buying, especially if it's in an area that I know is close to those Hillside Overlay Districts. And it's not just like a corner of the city or, you know, a clear-cut delineation. It is all over the city, including some of our most expensive and most popular neighborhoods. So another natural disaster that we're dealing with right now is flooding. As I speak to you today, we are at flood levels that we saw 7 years ago. And when I saw it 7 years ago, I thought to myself that this is probably the only time I'll ever see this much flooding. It was a really big deal. But here we are again, only 7 years later, and we have some pretty catastrophic flooding all over the region. Floods aren't unique to Cincinnati, of course, but if you're moving here from a drier area, you may not know all of the things to look out for. When I bring up floods, many people are most concerned about the Ohio River. However, it's often the smaller rivers and waterways that can be more problematic. If you think about it, the Ohio River is a very large river, and it's a large river basin, so it has more room to spread out and can absorb more volume, while those smaller waterways can get inundated more easily. And just like landslides, we do have a resource to help you steer clear from known problematic areas. Our FEMA flood zone map is another resource that I am frequently referencing to help my clients stay out of those problematic areas. And in the cases that are a little more questionable, I will reach out to some of the people I trust the most, including the person I trust with my insurance more than anyone else. Not only is it the person I trust with my insurance, but it's also who I refer to all of my clients. This is really helpful because going to that insurance professional can help us understand if you will have a higher premium for that home rather than buying any other home in the area. But water's not only an issue if you're living in a flood zone. So we'll talk about how to mitigate those risks later in this video. One of our least surprising issues is wind and storm damage. Now there's no map that's going to help us buy a home in this region that avoids wind and storm damage. It's something that we're all going to deal with. However, if you know what to look out for, you can avoid riskier properties, or at least know how to mitigate those issues as they come up. The wind and storm damage we see the most here is frequently going to impact the roof of your home as well as trees around your home. And the tree damage can cause other damage as well. So I'm always going to look out for trees that are near the home that are either very old, very large, or just don't look very healthy. I'm gonna look at that tree differently if it's right next to your home or if it's away from any other structure. I'm also going to be very mindful if that tree is overhanging a neighbor's property, because depending on the situation, if the tree is located on your property, however it falls or a branch falls off of it onto your neighbor's property, you may be paying for that just the same as if it were your house. And our last natural issue is going to be probably one of the last things you ever think about. And that issue is just the soil under and around your home. Yeah, dirt. In this area, we typically have what's referred to as clay soil. Clay soil is highly compacted with very small particles. The issue with clay soil, if you've ever heard of someone complain about clay soil, they may have been complaining about how hard it is for them to grow their favorite flowers or grow a pristine lawn. And those are real issues with clay because it doesn't, and those are real issues with clay. However, it's not what we're gonna focus on today. Problem with clay soil when it comes to your home is how much water it can retain. It can really make drainage an issue. And that really becomes an issue because when the soil retains water around your home's foundation, it can create enough pressure to push in an entire wall. And that's something we see in this area quite frequently. What's most interesting to me is the way to avoid having these issues with saturated soil around your home is one of the cheapest fixes on your home. And that's your gutter. Your gutters are pivotal to keeping the water away from the foundation of your home. And from there, you really need to care about the grading of the soil, making sure it slopes away from your home so that the water doesn't collect around the home's foundation. And while it's going to take a chronic issue to have something as big as a foundation wall caving in, and while it may sound extreme to have something like a foundation wall cave in, and it is, it's so much easier to have issues with water in your basement if you're not getting that water away from the foundation wall. And a little bit of water can become a huge issue. And when it comes to water in your basement, it may end up in an area that you don't have easy access to. That exposure to water could destroy any soft materials in your home, and worse, it can create a great environment for mold. So those are 4 issues that we can identify before we even go into the home. So those are 4 natural issues that we can identify before even walking into the home. In fact, 2 of those can be identified before we even go to the property at all, just by looking at the listing online and identifying where it is on those disaster maps. The issues that are unique to Cincinnati based on the types of homes we have here, as well as the surrounding area. So here are 5 red flags I am actively looking for inside the home when my clients are considering a purchase. One key thing to note, what I do as a realtor will not replace the inspection. Everyone should get an inspection when they're considering buying a home. And in fact, I have advised all of my clients to get an inspection. But what I've been able to do is help my clients avoid wasting money on an inspection that we know is going to go poorly. So here are the 5 issues that I most commonly see when we're looking at homes in the Cincinnati area. The first item on the list is foundation damage or structural issues. We often see these issues in a few different ways. More than likely, we're gonna identify those issues in the basement of the home. It's actually very common to see cracks in the basement walls if they are exposed. However, there are certain cracks that I worry about more than others. What's most worrisome is when I see a horizontal crack. A horizontal crack usually indicates immense pressure pressure on the other side of that wall, meaning the soil is pushing the wall in. And it's not that I don't worry at all about vertical crack. Vertical cracks usually come about as the home settles. And all homes settle. I would worry more about those vertical cracks if they are expanding or if they are letting water into the basement. I mentioned earlier in this video, the best way to keep water away from your foundation and reduce the pressure that those walls are incurring is making sure that you have good gutters and a proper drainage system. It's not going to reduce all of the water around your foundation though. Modern homes in this area, if they have basements, typically will have something that's called a sump pump, which pumps water away from the foundation. It's essential to make sure that that sump pump is working correctly. And not only that, I would suggest having a battery backup. Typically, if we're having a lot of water, it's probably during a storm, and the chances of the power going out during those storms is high. You are going to need your sump pump most during heavy storms, and those heavy storms will bring a lot of water, but it also increases the chances that the power goes out in your home. So the battery backup ensures that you still have a sump pump powered by that battery, getting the water away from the home. It also gives you a secondary pump in case a primary pump fails. Typically, if that happens, the sump pump will have an alarm, but I would recommend checking on the sump pump in your basement frequently. Many of the homes in Cincinnati are old enough that they're built in a way that they were never meant to be waterproof. We see homes with stone foundations and even stone floors, and typically these basements are always going to have some bit of moisture. So it's essential to make sure that even though we can't make that basement waterproof, or at least it may be cost prohibitive to make that basement waterproof, we want to get the moisture out of the air as best as possible. So I would absolutely have a dehumidifier in those basements. And if you're touring a home that has a musty basement, it may be more than just a minor inconvenience, because if it's been musty and damp for too long, you may have a mold issue. And lastly, on these structural issues, we really want to keep our eyes out for termite damage, because if you have a home that's built with any wood in this area, if left unattended, termites will get to it. And the problem with termites isn't just that you're gonna have bugs in your home, they actually eat through the wood. This can be as extreme as the main beam in your home being entirely eaten through and having no structural support at all. And while this can be fixed, if untreated for too long, you may have sagging floors or issues that are going to be more and more expensive to deal with later. So again, this is something that we're looking out for on all showings, and we can't always see, because oftentimes in a modern basement or a renovated basement, all of the walls are covered with drywall. So we can't see all of the issues that may be problematic. However, again, your inspector has tools to have a better idea of what's happening behind those walls. The second item on this list is outdated electric. And there's a whole range of issues with outdated electric. The most extreme of those issues is what we call knob and tube wiring. And you'll get really conflicting feedback on how significant of an issue that is. For some people, they won't consider buying a home with knob and tube wiring. And in fact, if you are getting insurance quotes for a home with knob and tube wiring, you can expect to pay a higher insurance premium. The scariest part about that is the reason why that's going to be a higher premium is an elevated risk of fire. And while that's a real threat, I wouldn't want to just scare you away from a home with knob and tube wiring. We see this type of wiring pretty frequently in homes in Cincinnati. And that is because over 70% of the homes in Cincinnati were built before 1970. And it's actually really common to go into homes that were built in the 1800s. Knob and tube wiring, though, became outdated 80 plus years ago. And in a way, I think that speaks to the longevity of the product. However, as it deteriorates with age, it can then become an issue. The biggest issue there is most of us are not trained electricians. It also means the outlets in your house are not going to be grounded because knob and tube wiring won't allow for it. Which brings us to my next point about electric. It's not just knob and tube wiring we have to look out for. We see other things like aluminum wiring. We see wiring issues from DIY projects. And those two things can go together pretty frequently. One of the most frequent DIY issues that I see is older aluminum wiring spliced into copper wiring. This is actually a pretty big fire hazard. because that older aluminum wiring has a lower heat tolerance than copper. So while copper will keep pushing more energy, the aluminum is getting too hot and then can catch on fire. Knob and tube wiring is something that we can call out when we are in the home for a showing if it is exposed, so typically in the basement. Some of the other wiring issues can be harder to see. However, just inspecting the electric panel can tell us a lot. You want things to be neat and tidy in there because it shows a professional did the work. But speaking of the electric panel, that could be the issue in itself. It's not unheard of to see electric panels in homes that were recalled years ago. One example of that is an electric panel that was manufactured by a company called Federal Pacific. Their stab locked panels and breakers had a extremely high failure rate, again resulting in fire. This is a big enough issue that if I were considering a home that had that type of electric panel in, I would not proceed with the sale unless it were going to be replaced. So in this situation that we can identify threats in a showing as opposed to waiting for the inspection, we can actually write the offer to say that we need those items replaced or we're not going to buy the home. Unless you're in a multiple offer situation, you have a lot more leverage in this moment than you do later after the inspection, because the seller knows you are already in hundreds, if not thousands of dollars, and you are going to be inclined to keep the deal moving forward, as opposed to when it's just an offer. If they push back on that, it's really easy for you to walk away. The next item on the list is plumbing and sewer, and there are three main issues that we see in Cincinnati based on our older homes. One of the most common of these issues is coming across clay or ceramic sewer lines. These older clay or ceramic sewer lines have a couple issues. One, over time, they can just be crushed by the weight of the soil above it, or they can actually be prone to root intrusion. Tree roots are specifically designed to find water, and unfortunately, your sewer line is going to provide not only water, but some really good fertilizer. Really gross fertilizer, but unfortunately really good fertilizer. So if a tree root can start to find a crack in those pipes, it will grow into it and continue to grow. This will clog the sewer lines eventually, and if not clog, it will break them entirely. And just as your home settles, so does the soil around your home, and that can cause the sewer line to have offsets, which again will cause backups and a really disgusting situation in your home if that problem persists. Other issues we often see in homes in Cincinnati can come from cast iron pipes, which can be susceptible to breaking down and having the material flake off inside the pipe. These pipes can break down so much over time that they can develop pinholes that can turn into larger leaks. And then the last issue for plumbing and sewer is lead water line. Recently, the city of Cincinnati has set out an initiative to replace every lead water line around the city. However, that may not cover you if you're not buying a home in the city of Cincinnati. Because our region is made up of several cities, you need to know which areas have gotten rid of all of the lead pipes and which areas have not. It's a repair that you can make yourself as a homeowner. However, it can be costly. So a lot of these plumbing and sewer issues are going to be things that we don't necessarily see when we're in a showing. However, they're all things that we can call out based on the age of the home that this may be an issue here and we should look out for it when we get to the inspection. And also from there may be other issues that we're seeing while in the showing that would indicate that those things have been problematic. The next issue that we're going to look out for is what I'm going to call climate control, which you could separate into two separate issues, your HVAC issues and your insulation issues. But those two things are going to go hand in hand. Some of the most extreme examples of this is literally 100-year-old boiler furnace. It's shocking to hear that, knowing that most furnaces don't last longer than 20 years nowadays, but we can still find 100-plus-year-old boilers in some of the homes around Cincinnati. And personally, I have a love-hate for these old boilers because I think it's remarkable that they've lasted, and really a boiler system can be more efficient than the forced air systems that we use today. But if I'm buying a home for my family, I'm probably not going to want to rely on a 100-plus-year-old boiler. And let's say the boiler itself has been updated, and let's say you want to convert a home from the old boiler system to a more modern forced air system, but you may have a bigger issue when it comes to the cost of that, because homes that were built with boilers typically were built before air conditioning, and if it has a boiler and no air conditioning, you probably don't have ductwork in the home to have a central air or forced air furnace system. Or if the home does have that ductwork now, it's probably routed through some valuable closet space that you no longer have. Outside of the mechanics of the heating and cooling issue, we come across a lot of homes that have converted spaces, either converted basements or oftentimes converted attic. Those attics are notorious for being hot in the summer and cold in the winter. Again, the ductwork wasn't there when the home was originally built, and you've cut down on the space to add in insulation once you finish out those spaces. A telltale sign of this issue, even if you're in some of our more temperate months in the spring or fall, when you may be fine without air conditioning or a furnace, is looking out for window units in those spaces. To me, this is always an indicator that the central air system in that home is not sufficient for that upstairs space. This isn't an end-all be-all in my opinion, because I would still consider a home that has that setup. However, for my purposes, I would be looking at converting that to a mini split. The new modern mini split systems are far more efficient and not as big of an eyesore. And really what I like most about it is having separate temperature controls for those upstairs bedroom areas as opposed to the main areas in the house. So if you like to keep your bedroom cool at night, you can save a lot more on the utility bill with a mini split system. And on the issue of insulation, you are going to come across those issues oftentimes in those upstairs near attic areas, but it's not just the actual insulation in the wall. If you're considering an older home that has original windows, you are likely losing most of your energy through the window. That can be really costly. As much as I like the older windows and the aesthetic of those windows, I don't necessarily want to pay hundreds of more dollars every month to keep my home either warm in the winter or cool in the summer. So there is a breaking point that I would make that conversion. And our last item on the list is going to be the roof and gutters on your home. It's really easy to not think about your roof and gutters when they're not a problem. However, when they are a problem, you are going to have a bigger problem if you don't deal with it. When it comes to buying a home though, it can come front and center really quickly. It is becoming more and more common for insurance companies to deny coverage based on the age of a roof. And previously, a 20-year-old roof would have been fine for most insurance companies because they wouldn't have considered that an imminent issue. However, anything that is 20 years or older is going to be a concern when we start talking to the insurance company. The biggest issues there is the cost for replacement of roofs has gone up significantly, and we are seeing more frequent storms causing more damage to the roof of home. Now, that wind can cause damage of the shingles as well as any other roofing material, but also the gutters of the home. And we know how important the gutters are because we talked about that earlier in this video. And as I mentioned earlier, gutters tend to be a really easy and cheap thing to replace, except for some of our oldest and favorite styles of homes in the Cincinnati area has something called box gutter. The box gutter system is built directly into the roof. So a failing box gutter becomes more costly immediately. And while I have owned a previous home that had box gutters and unfortunately failed box gutter at one point, I would still not deter you from buying one of these homes. Because if you're interested in the older architecture of the homes that we have in our area, you would eliminate a lot of homes if you eliminated all of the homes that have box gutter. All right, you may be thinking that this is a lot to remember when you're looking for a home. And you're not wrong. The hardest part about all of this is continuously looking out for these things while just feeling the space that you're in. I see my role as a realtor when representing buyers as really looking for those red flags. And red flags are two different things, really. It's red flags that are a threat to your home, and it's red flags that just don't fit your criteria. And I'm honored to represent all of my clients, and I would be honored to represent you if you are considering buying a home in the Cincinnati area. So no matter if you're looking in Ohio or Kentucky, let me know if you would like to have some help through a free consultation, as well as kicking off your home search for the perfect home for you here in Cincinnati and across our region. And while I'm confident I can pick out some of these issues, I cannot replace the inspector in this process. The inspector that you hire is so important, and we are always happy to refer out the inspectors that we trust the most and have worked for most of our clients. The things we look for in inspectors are that they will be thorough, they will be honest, looking out for your best interest, but they won't blow up small issues into big issues. The threat here is that can create a situation in which you, as the client, are caught up on something that doesn't matter as much as something else. And when we're asking for the wrong repairs, we could be setting ourselves up for big risks down the road. And if you found this video helpful, click that subscribe button and check the bell to make sure that you don't miss content like this in the future. I cover everything relevant to Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky, especially around real estate, but when it comes to real estate and just life in this area. And I hope that this channel isn't just a one-way conversation. Go to the comments, let me know what I missed, what issues have you come across with homes in Cincinnati. And despite this video being focused on a lot of threats and a lot of potential issues, buying in Cincinnati does not have to be scary. You just have to know what to look out for. And when you do know what to look out for, I think buying in Cincinnati is one of the best investments you can make. So if those are things that you care about and you need a realtor on your side, reach out to me. All of my contact information is in the show notes. So if you go to the video description, you will find my phone number. To give me a call or text, you will find my email, and you'll find links where you can connect with me on social media or even schedule a call. And until next time, I will see you around Cincinnati.